Welcome to the PHP Essential Training Series. I am Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we'll be talking about understanding operators in PHP. Part 2. This is part 2 of the series. So, operators in PHP continued. In part 2 of our series, we'll start the tutorial with a look at the comparison operators in PHP. The comparison operators are used to compare two values in a Boolean fashion. In other words, a true or false fashion is what Boolean means. So the first one we'll look at is the double equal signs, and that is equal. So in other words, x is equal to y. True if x is equal to y. And that's what our result would be. The triple equal is an identical comparison operator, and that's true if x is equal to y and they are the same data type. Now, if you don't understand data types yet inside of programming, you will as we go through this lab, because I'm going to demonstrate what the difference between equal and identical is, because that's something that really needs to be understood, especially when you start writing your own code. The next one is the not equal, or the exclamation mark equal sign. And that's true if x is not equal to y. And then we have the greater than and less than, which is not equal. True if x is not equal to y. It's basically the same thing as the not equal, but we tend to use the exclamation equal much more than we use the less than and greater than. And then the next one is the exclamation double equal signs, which is not identical. So it's true if x is not equal to y or if they're not the same data type. And again, we'll demonstrate that in the lab. And it's very important that you understand this identical thing because it does come up quite a bit in programming. Then we have the less than sign. And that's true if x is less than y based on our example. The greater than is true if x is greater than y based on our example. And again, we'll demonstrate all these in the lab. Then we have the greater than or equal to, and that's true if x is greater than or equal to y. And then the less than or equal to, and again, true if x is less than or equal to y. And all these are based on, by the way, this example. That's the only reason I keep saying x is or x is not, because I happen to be using x as the variable name. We could actually be using anything. And you'll see that in the examples, because I will mix it up a little bit as we go through the lab and demonstrate these. All right, so let's demonstrate. Let's drop into our development environment and demonstrate what we just talked about. All right, so let's drop out of our presentation and drop down into our development environment. The first thing I'm going to do is confirm that we've got the Apache server up and running. Again, we will be working with PHP, so we must have our server running in the background. Next thing I want to do is let's go ahead and bring up Sublime Text 3. That will be my text editor that I'll be using for this demonstration. And Google Chrome will be the browser that I'll be using. Right now I'm actually in the local host with my template file loaded. I'm actually going to go in and reload this template file and do a save as. I want to save this as operators_2.php so we don't confuse this with the last exercises that we had done. And then I want to go in and load up the operator_2 file inside my browser window so that we've got that one loaded for our demonstrations. Let's go ahead and change our title to Operators Part 2. And I want to come down and give myself an H3 heading of Operators Part 2. Close out that H3. And then right below that, let's go ahead and give it an H4, because now we're actually looking at comparison operators, and I want to actually have that in here, because I think we'll do one other one before we close this tutorial out. We'll do the comparisons, and we'll probably do let me think what else is next. We could probably do the incrementing and decrementing operators. We'll talk about those after we do our comparison operators. So looking at the comparison operators, there's a lot of things that we talked about in our presentation. The first thing we talked about was this equal operator. So I'm going to come right below that H4 heading. Let's go ahead. First off, let's go ahead and make sure we load our browser, make sure we've got the right file loaded, save all our changes, which we did not do. That's why I did not see them. And there we got our two headings up. Excellent. All right, so let's open up our PHP tags. So we've got these code tags to actually put the code in that we're going to demonstrate. I'm going to come down right below that. Let's assign a couple of variables. I'm going to say variable x, and let's make x equal to 30. Let's come right below that and make variable y. And we'll make y equal to 20. And then I'm going to come down and say variable z. And we'll make z equal to, let's make z equal to 20, but I want z to be equal to 20 inside quotation marks. And you'll see why we're going to do that in a minute. Let's go ahead and save those changes. So the first thing we want to demonstrate, so let's demonstrate the equal. So what I want to do, let's go ahead and do a var dump. And var dump is a function that's actually built into PHP that allows us to actually look at variables, not only at the values themselves, but the data types, and it will actually output whether or not we have a true or false value. So I'm going to say var dump, and then I'm going to put variable x is equal to variable z. So I'm looking at the value of x, which is 30, and the value of z, which is 25. And I want to know, are they equal? And if I refresh my browser window, first if I save all my changes, it's twice I've done that, and refresh our browser window, we'll see that that says false. They are not equal, which is true. They are not equal. Let's look at variable y and variable z. And you'll notice in y we've got a value of a decimal value of 20, and in z I've got a value of 20, but it's technically a string value of 20 because it's in quotation marks. So let's go ahead and update that. This is telling me that's true. They are equal. That's interesting because technically one's a string and one's a decimal, but let's put a triple equal sign in here. In fact, I'm going to copy this and just bring it right down below, because now I want to know, are they identical? Because remember, I told you there's a difference between this equal to and identical based on our chart. Identical says they have to be equal to and of the same data type, whereas equal to is, are they just equal? Are they equal? So let's go ahead and save that change, refresh our browser window. So now I've got this boolean of true, they are equal, and false, they are not identical. And actually, let's go ahead and put a, I'm going to put an echo in here of a line break so that we can keep track of what we're doing here. Now let's go ahead and save these again. So the values are equal, but they are not identical because they're not the same data type. And that's the big thing to understand about equal to and identical. So let's look at another one. Let's look at our not equal to. I'm going to go ahead and copy these two. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, is y not equal to, and the reason, by the way, I'm using this var dump is because it gives me the boolean true or false. When we're using these comparisons, the vast majority of the time it's in conditional statements, if statements, if else statements, and we're actually looking for a true or false value to go through a different branch of code. And that's why I'm using the var dump, so you can see the true or false value that's generated by these. So y is not equal to z. False, because y is equal to z. It's not identical to z, but it's equal to z, and you'll see that in a minute because we're going to look at the identical operator. Is not identical. Control C. I'm just going to copy this. Let's copy both. Come down and paste it, and now we're going to look at the exact same. Is not identical. So put in the double equal. So now I've got the not sign with double equals. Save. So true. It's not identical. Y is not identical, but y is equal to z. That's why this one came back false, because I said y is not equal to z. Y is 20, z is 20. They are equal, but they're not identical. And again, getting back the true and false. So make certain you understand how this works, how these comparison operators work. Let's look at another one. So I'm just going to copy that, come down right below it, paste it in here, and again we're looking for the true or false values. And let's look at is x, so let's change our value here for a minute. Is x less than z? So looking at our values, x is 30 and z is 20. Is x less than z? That should come back false. X is not less than z. X is actually greater than z. So let's go ahead and try that. X is actually greater than z, so this one should actually come back true. And it is coming back true. But the big thing here is keep in mind that Z is a string and X is a value. It's a decimal value. So actually a better one here would be X and Y. Because technically you would normally not compare a string value to a decimal value, especially when you're doing it this way. It's much better to do these with decimal to decimal. And as we get farther along in the PHP programming, you'll learn that we can actually convert these strings to decimals if we need to. If that was supposed to be a decimal value and it was entered as a string, we could actually strip off those quotation marks, as you'll see in a much later exercise as we work with string values. All right, so we looked at the greater than, we looked at the less than. Another one we looked at was greater than or equal to. So let's go down here. I'm going to go ahead and copy these. Let's paste in another set. I'm going to change, or I'm going to paste that in there, and I'm going to say is less, greater than, or equal to Y. So is X, which is 30, greater than or equal to Y, which is 20. That should come back true because it is greater than or equal to. If I change that, it does come back true. If I put in another value here, let's put in another value of I. And I'm just going to say I is equal to, variable I. I is equal to 30. And now I'm going to say right here, is X greater than or equal to I? And again, this should come back true because it is greater than or equal to, because it's technically equal to. But what if I changed, come down here and bring this in, I'm going to come down here and paste. What if I actually made is X less than or equal to I? And again, this should still come back true because X and I are the same value. So it is equal to I. And it does, it comes back true. Now if I make I 31, it's no longer going to be true because it's not less than or equal to, it's actually greater than. And you'll see it came back false. So again, understanding how these comparisons work, very important to understanding how we can use our conditional statements inside of PHP. And it's an important aspect of what you're learning when you're programming in PHP and using conditional statements. So get a good handle on the equal to, get a good handle on the identical, not equal, not identical, very important, greater than and less than, very important. They're not hard to understand, they're not hard to use once you understand them, but they're an important aspect of our conditional statements inside of PHP. All right, so let me drop back into our presentation for a minute so we can talk about some different operators inside of PHP. And the next one I want to look at is the incrementing and decrementing operators inside of PHP. Again, very important when we're doing our programming. The increment and decrement operators are used to increment or decrement a variable's value inside of the PHP code. And again, you'll understand it as we go through these demonstrations. It's not difficult once you see it in action. So we actually have a plus plus, then a variable name. That's a pre-increment. It increments the value of the X by 1, then it returns X. So it actually increments the value first, and then it returns X to us with that new value. Then we also have a post increment, which is the variable name plus plus, which returns X, then it increments X by 1. So we actually see X, and then after we see it, it increments it by 1. That's used very, very often when we're going through loops inside of PHP. You'll see that used quite often. Then we have the pre-decrement, which decrements X by 1, then returns the value of X. And we have the post-decrement, where we actually return the value of X, then we decrease X by 1. And again, if it sounds a little confusing, once we go through the demonstrations, I'm sure you'll get it. It's not hard to understand once you see it working. So let's go ahead and drop into our development environment and demonstrate what we just talked about. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of the presentation. Let's bring up Sublime Text 3 and my browser, which is Google Chrome, for this demonstration. I'm going to come down below where we did our last demonstrations. I'm actually going to copy my H3 and my H4 headings. And I'm going to put those below my PHP tag so we can actually separate this. And I'm going to name this one as increment and decrement operators. I'm just going to call it increment operators. And you'll know that it actually covers both. Let's go ahead and save those changes, refresh our browser window, and that should give us a new area to work in. Now I want to go ahead and open up my PHP tags. Come down and close that tag. And the first thing we're going to do, let's do the example of the pre-increment that we talked about inside the presentation. That's where we actually increment x by 1, and then we return x. So I'm going to come into my PHP tags. Let's go ahead and set up our variable x. And I'm going to say that's equal to 10. And then I want to come right below it. I'm going to say let's echo. And I want to echo plus plus x. And then stop that. And then I want to echo x. And then stop that one. And actually then what I want to do is right below that I'm going to go ahead and do a break tag so that we've got this set up for our next demonstration. Save that. Let's go ahead and save that change. So what I'm doing here, based on our discussion in the presentation with the pre-increment, I'm incrementing x by 1, then I'm returning x. And then we're actually going to see it. So we should see this twice. Oops, should have put a break tag here too, because we're actually echoing the value twice. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a break to that one also. So that comes back on 2 separate lines. Save the change, refresh, and now we'll, oops, syntax error. You know why? Because I didn't concatenate. I have to actually concatenate these together because it's 2 separate strings in that echo statement. So now we can actually see my 11. So the first time I echo it, I'm adding to it and echoing, and then I'm echoing x again. So you can see that we actually added to it before we viewed it here. And the reason we know that because we started out with a value of 10 and then we echoed it again. And if we do the post, so let's go ahead and copy this very same group, come down right below it, but this time instead of doing it before, I want to do it after. So I'm going to actually move my plus signs to after the value. So I actually should see the 10 first. But I actually need to reassign the value. Because if I don't reassign it, we're actually going to see the value from the one up top. Because now x was 11. So we're going to reassign it back to 10. Then we're going to do a post. So I actually should see 10 and 11 in this one. 10 for the very first, because I'm echoing x. Then I'm adding 1 to it. And then I'm echoing x again. So now we see it added to after we display the first one. Same thing with the next. If we actually do the decrement, let's go ahead and copy this. Come down right below it. Paste it in place. And this time I actually want to do, I'm going to go pull these out. Let's put our minus signs before. Save. Review. So now I've got 2 9s because I've actually decremented. I've removed 1 from it, then I've displayed it, and then I've displayed it again. If I do the exact same thing, put it down here, but now I do it afterwards. So I'm actually going to subtract after I display the first value. So I should see 10 first, and then I should see 9. Save all our changes. Refresh our browser window. And now you see 10 first, and then we see 9 because I'm displaying 10. I'm echoing 10 to the browser window. Then I'm subtracting 1 from it. Then I'm displaying 10 again. Or displaying x again. I shouldn't say 10. Displaying the variable again because the variable could be anything. So again, very important to understand how we use these. And we do use a lot of this in loops. You'll see the increment and decrement a lot as we're working through loops inside PHP. It's used quite often to display information in loops or to keep track of our counter in loops as we work our way through variables or arrays.